it's live.
We're in?
I think we're in.
We are in.
Excellent.
Let me just make sure everybody can see us. Nope, I don't think you can see all of us.
That's all right.
Closer. There we go. That was one way to start. There we go. I think I just need to move this back.
Okay.
There we go. We are good.
Fabulous.
Perfect.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Financial Crime Leaders Summit from Transform Finance. We're here live in New York this morning. I'm Jane Blakeway. I'm the co-founder for Transform Finance, and I'm here together with my co-host Una van den Berg, who is co-founder and CEO for Raw Compliance. And we've got a very special guest with us here today, who will also be joining us on the stage later on here in New York. And I'd like to welcome to the stage today is Caron Van Cleef, who is the CEO for Luminous Group. So welcome, Carol.
Thank you.
And welcome, Una.
I'm such a fangirl. I'm not the co-founder, I'm the only founder of Raw. But
did I say co-founder?
It's
Sorry.
fine. It's fine. It's me, myself, and I. I do feel schizophrenic at times. And I think that's the joy of any kind of, founder. It's like, what position am I playing today?
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah. Well, welcome both, everyone, ladies.
Before we started today, I actually brought Jane a gift. So we're going to start this off on a high today that there's no smoke alarms, there are no fire alarms, there's no paramedics, and there's nobody else in the building from any type of kind of services. At the last one that we did, at the very end of the day, there was a medical emergency in the building, nothing to do with us.
In London, yeah.
And when I played back the podcast, I looked like a meerkat. I'm literally the whole time looking like it was so embarrassed. Jane said to me, I couldn't keep a straight face, Una. And so just before we came, I went and I bought a meerkat teddy bear to give to her to remind her of my professional performance in London.
Yeah, events, live events. Exactly. So Carol, we'd love to have a chat with you today and obviously hear about your experiences in the space and dive into some of the questions. I think we wanted to kick off on the US regulatory horizon. So how do you see the US and global regulatory landscape evolving in 2026 as digital assets become more integrated into mainstream finance? We can kick off.
I would say, I don't know whether it's a difficult day to address that, but if you've been following the U.S. news, it's been a rather, I don't know, tumultuous is the right word, but definitely exciting the last couple of days and last 24 hours in particular. And I think how some of what's in the news today plays out over the coming weeks is definitely going to have implications for especially the digital asset agenda in the next 12 to 15 months.
Mm-hmm.
So complicated subject on multiple levels, not the least of which is the drama that's happening real time right now. Second is we're going into an election year. And right now it's almost the middle of November, and we're going, I guess the middle of November now. And that means we only have a few legislative days this year. And the next year, when they pick up on the same agenda that they've been working on, they're not going to have a whole lot of days to deal with. And what that means is that the chances of getting legislation go way down next year.
It's interesting. I've been working in the digital asset space since, goodness me, I started back in 2015 in Singapore. And obviously I've been blessed to have been a part of our journey of regulatory development globally in the digital asset space. And one of the things that has concerned me a little bit is the speed of adoption of regulation, but also, as you rightly said, government changes during those transitions. And we saw that in the UK with the Conservative to Labour government. It basically caused the best part of a 12-month delay on the new regulatory development sphere for registration of firms in the digital asset space. In the US, for me, it's been one of the most complicated regulatory environments for licensing because of the state-by-state narrative, as opposed to kind of a holistic countrywide narrative. So it'd be interesting to hear your viewpoints on what do you think we could do better to support digital asset firms coming into the US market for basically licensing? Like, is there anything from a government level potentially we could look more holistically at a one-off approval, or that will never happen given the dynamics of ownership and oversight in the various state regulatory environments?
You just packed a lot into
That's a
it.
great question. Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure where to start. Having said that, what I should have said too is that we've had a major piece of legislation, the first major piece of legislation in the digital asset crypto world ever in the United States. But the regulatory piece is a major part. So two things to say about that. One is we still have a system of laws and regulations that are in place and will be in place until any action is taken to pass laws and then to implement those laws. So the Genius Act is the perfect example, which sets the path forward for stablecoins. But we're just at the very infancy of the regulatory process to implement that. So what do you do with respect to stablecoins between now and it could be probably not 6 months, it could be a year from now, or it could be a lot longer than that. What does one that wants to get into stablecoins do? And you have to revert back to what our laws and regulations are right now, which means then takes us back into the states.
Yes.
And the states have been I should note that they've been at the table in all the negotiations on the federal level, so there is a role for the states going forward. Yeah. But historically, at least with respect to the exchange of digital currency, those types of activities, they've been regulated at the state level. The best I could say is have good counsel and wise advisors who can help you navigate that. And unfortunately, that's been a very uneven path for folks over the years. The lack of initiative on the part of the states, and I want to be careful on how I say that, has put us in a situation that I've been involved in these issues. I was doing digital currencies before Bitcoin came along. And trying to get the states, even in that sort of 5-year period before Bitcoin came along, to pay attention to those issues, much less moving into Bitcoin. Very, very difficult. It was something that they just sort of kept pushing away until they couldn't quite, but they're still not fully engaged.
It's interesting because Wyoming obviously has been one of the most foresighted kind of regulatory environments from the state perspective, but it's interesting, we're in New York. I've actually respected significantly the New York authorities in the slow and steady, really doing their due diligence, making sure that there's not going to be a threat to the financial stability of the system with firms coming in before that approval is given. But stablecoins concerns me because if we don't get regulation right, I fear we're going to create a shadow banking system, because I don't think that we fully understand the utility use case for stablecoins currently. And I'm actually not overly concerned about mainstream digital assets, even Bitcoin. What we need to look at in digital assets is their different inherent use cases. And if you look at BTC and Bitcoin, because of blockchain analytics, like it is the least likely used method by any illicit actor because of traceability. But then if you look at modern day financial scams, it's all based on basically Tether. Everything is going through Tether, which in itself is a stable coin. And the question you have to ask yourself is, why is that the case? Why is that happening? And I think we need to look much more at the use case of stablecoins and make sure we regulate in the right way to protect both the consumer and the market.
Okay, again.
Sorry.
2 or 3 takeaways.
I just want to say, this is not Red Bull, it's apple juice.
Just to answer that question. Well, you have a few hours ahead of me too. So. And I was up late last night the emails that were being unfolded real time. First of all, your comment about digital assets is that, I'm going to take it even a step higher than where you were, is that there are multiple types of digital assets. And part of the confusion and the conversations we have generally is the mishing and mashing of these different kinds of assets. So for example, the Genius Act was focused really on stablecoins and not much beyond that. And then we have the market structure legislation, that is kicking around now in various iterations, and that's going to focus on tokens and the different kinds of use cases for tokens. And again, we may have securities, we may have loyalty and rewards tokens, we have all sorts of things that are happening.
UAE does that beautifully in their legislation. They're the first regulator that really breaks down the utility use case for the different types of assets and how they can be used to basically risk weight them. It's not one size fits all. Exactly, so breaking it down in terms of how they can be used, the derivative products that can be created with the various digital assets. And if you look at like kind of our TradeFi regulatory system, you can't compare a spot FX with a CDS. I don't know, it's not the best example, but that is what we have done. Really, to begin with in the digital asset space, we just took an attitude of it's everything.
And whether you say that's ignorance on the part of people who get into the subject and start talking about it, but it has muddled the conversation for years.
I wouldn't even say ignorance. I actually think it's just down to we were all in the same boat. This was totally new. We're finding our feet as we move along, and the development of the utility use cases has been a natural organic development on the back of how we've looked at how they can be used in different applications.
But I will say, I would ask you to define what new is. What is new? Is new a year? Is new 5 years? Is new 10 years? Is it 20 years? And I think one of my complaints with respect to what we've been through, if I'm allowed to express a complaint, is the fact that a lot of what we're talking about now isn't really new conceptually in many, many ways. So for example, when I cut my teeth really totally taking the dive down the rabbit hole, it was on a digital currency that was gold backed. That was in 2008. It was 100% backed by gold. It was ledger based. It was not crypto. But many of the same principles applied then, and in a lot of ways it was the first stable coin. So I got a running start on the issues around stable coin. I want to go to your shadow banking system, because I would argue we are already there. We already have that shadow banking system, and it's accelerating at an incredible rate. And most of it's being driven through Tether, and various iterations of that. We have other competitors that are coming, but don't even start to compare from a, want to use the term market cap perspective.
I just fear at times. Sorry, Jane.
That's all right. No.
What concerns me at times is that I love the comment you made about is it new. The truth is the evolution of financial products is not new. It's something that has evolved, and regulation has evolved to support over the last 100 years of the regulatory environment. We need to learn from our previous mistakes in terms of understanding products and services. What we can't always see is we know the known knowns, but there are known unknowns in terms of the evolution of products. But I think we need to do it much better than we are in the digital asset space. I think we've allowed certain digital assets to start operating without, the argument is, did the regulators initially believe that these products needed to be regulated? No, because they didn't believe that digital assets were part of the financial regulatory regime until, let's be honest, 2017, 2018, that's when things began to change. But again, it's part of the evolution of products.
Well, I think it's more than just the evolution of the products. Getting the British piece here. But it's mindset. So I was fortunate enough to have been there in some of the earlier days of crypto. Incredible energy that was present at the time, inventiveness, and in some ways it was sort of like the computer. evolution of the computer, where you started the big mainframe that was really only accessible to the largest corporations, and eventually moved down into a laptop or a phone where you can do almost where you can do everything in your hand. I think in a lot of ways the technology, the algorithmic nature of the code was accessible. We were suddenly taking complex financial concepts and making them accessible through the use of code. So one of the striking moments was probably early 2014. And I had someone ask me to sit down with a young man, 24 years old, I believe, and see what he had and what I thought about it. And he opened up his computer and displayed to me what was a securities exchange. You could, if he had a company that said, I'll issue a stock on it, he could have gone live with it then and there.
Wow.
And so it was no surprise that you saw the likes of New York Stock Exchange, DTCC, NASDAQ be some of the earliest players in this space because they recognized what was going to happen here. I think from the broader regulatory perspective, again, I was having first-hand conversations with the regulators, and a lot of them just thought, we're wishing it was going to go away. And there's even still a piece of that exists today, though I think that's diminished significantly, that this is all going to go away. I'm a banking regulatory lawyer by background. We did a lot of that early evolution by product development in the banking industry. And so I knew how things would progress. And one of the things that I tried to talk with basically the young guys at the time, back in the 2013-14 time frame, was to think ahead, because this is all going to move mainstream.
Absolutely.
I think we're jumping ahead.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine.
But it's going to move mainstream, and you need to think about, one, that's going to be your exit, probably. Two, is it's going to help make the product more accessible, acceptable and accessible. And the problem is that, again, back to the mindset, is that everybody was in the minds, this is decentralized, this is disruptive, no laws apply. And I kept saying, no, that's wrong. And I got kicked off of stages. I got booed in the audiences because I would say, oh, wait a second, laws do apply. And that was not a message that people wanted to hear. Now, the fast forwarding, obviously in the United States, it's been a very interesting evolution, because we were taking laws that did apply in certain frameworks, and then suddenly none of them apply.
You mentioned that on regulatory. Sorry, Jen.
No, it's all right. We'll go on.
Just on the regulatory part. One of the things that was one of the biggest eye openers to me was back in kind of 2020, starting a GRC build for a crypto firm where there was a lack of regulatory framework in place. And it was the first time in my entire career that I didn't have a regulatory fallback when I started my AML risk assessment, for example. Very, very basic. It suddenly just hit me like a bolt out of the blue, was we have a tendency in our industry, especially as regulatory compliance professionals, to take regulation as the base point for beginning our risk assessment. So we map the regulation across. What is the licensing and permissions? How does that translate to the regulatory approvals that are required? What are then the legal requirements within those regulatory approvals that apply to us? And how must we then build our control framework to basically model that and make sure that we have, we can demonstrate to the regulator that their various regulations have been adopted and we're using the same language. And suddenly I was in a situation where I had to do it from a risk-based perspective, because I had to look inherently at the exposure on the products and services, the clients, the geography, third-party risk, transaction risk. I had to look at this because I had no choice. There was no regulation that I could leverage off. What I did have to do was obviously think regulation is common sense. It literally is. It's about protection. It's about control. And for the first time in my life, I built a pure risk-based AML risk assessment. And I was so proud of myself. But at the same time, I went, ooh, this has taken me nearly 20 years to get to this point, and FATF and various regulators around the globe are mandating risk-based approaches. I'm going to be honest, I am yet to see a real risk-based assessment. So one of the things that concerns me about the run to regulation is that we take that ability of, I wouldn't say ability, everybody can think for themselves, but when we give too much regulation, and I'm not just saying rules-based, but even principles-based regulation, we sometimes are giving individuals an ability to stop thinking. I don't know, that was just what I have seen, and I don't think that we truly, if we want to get this right and learn from the history of the mistakes in the TRADE5, we need to apply risk-based principles in terms of building out our controls and removing the silos across all of our risk functions and our data, because if we're building an organization that's starting from the position of tech, we cannot have fragmentation within risk functions or indeed data sets. And that then comes back to the regulatory environment of how we've built it all out. Sorry, again, a lot of things.
Yeah. Do you want to comment on that actually before then I'll lead in with one of our questions?
All sorts of things I'd like to say to that is that when I got involved in 2008 with this gold-backed digital currency system, it was at the cusp of the collapse of the financial systems worldwide because of the financial crisis. And I had been a banking regulatory lawyer for a number of years before that, had been involved in the evolution of the bailout from the savings and loan crisis going back to the early 90s, and knew all of the tools that were in the toolbox for the regulators. And when we hit the 2008 crisis, I was quite honestly rather disgusted, because the tools had been there had they been used by the regulators to have averted, or at least made it more minimal, the crisis. When I saw the digital currency system, I said, this is the future. It was really the future, because it went to all the points that you just said, is that the silos weren't there.
Yes.
You had a single platform that you were operating. It was new technology in part, which has been a major problem with the traditional TradFi, is that they've been working on a whole bunch of patchwork solutions. Exactly. And so that's the sort of the benefit, and in some ways what this technology is a leapfrog solution.
This glasses are
fine,
You don't want to be blind today. Another one bites the dust.
So, it just has put us in a very, it's a situation that I think those of us who've been on the other side have a very good understanding. And then we also, at least in the U.S., we have a legacy regulatory system that is very much bifurcated, which causes a lot of the problems. So it's interesting to hear your approach on putting all the pieces together and building out a compliance system, because I tend to come from it from the risk perspective to start with. And it's really a product analysis, because when we do a product analysis of all the moving pieces, from a lawyer's perspective, we have to know, all those aspects, including the risk. So, it's fascinating to hear your
unfortunately, the amount of compliance officers or indeed risk professionals that don't actually understand the products and risks that they have oversight for, whilst they're building risk functions, scares the living daylights out of me, but that's a separate discussion.
Shall we move on? We've obviously packed lots into this today, haven't we? Which is exactly what we were supposed to be doing. But should we touch on perhaps collaboration and industry alignment in terms of compliance functions, which maybe are a bit fragmented across custodians, exchanges, regulators? So where do you see the greatest opportunities for collaboration? So perhaps through public-private partnerships or industry consortiums and so on. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Let's start by saying collaboration is absolutely essential. Because things move too quickly. the private sector has the knowledge and knows where the technology is going. Not always where it's going.
Somebody does. We just have to find who
Well,
does.
but you just wake up every day and there's something new out there.
Yeah.
And then you have limited resources on the government side, but with certain mandates to protect people and do the things that governments typically do. I actually did a presentation at the Cambridge Symposium on Economic Crimes back in 2020. The only year that they had it all taped because of the pandemic, and it's still out there, I think. But it was a 10-minute segment on how I thought we needed to change the equation, change the calculus.
I haven't seen it
Because right now we've got a system where we do have some collaboration. We have actually growing collaboration, but for the most part, it's been industry to government, and not the other way.
Okay.
And in the meantime, we have some very sophisticated compliance investigatory type functions that have been built up in these different organizations, but they are seen as basically cost centers, unless they're fraud. I'm specific in trying to minimize the fraud, but your cost centers. And what I'd like to see them move is to at least a revenue neutral, if not revenue positive position. And I think it's incumbent upon the governmental bodies to leverage off of that kind of experience, but it's also because of the attacks and everything else that are happening from a technology standpoint. We're all in this together, and we need to work together.
And the big difference now, I love there's so many things that you said there. I'm like, I've got so many. I've got opinions.
We can take this offline as well.
Definitely.
Sorry,
Point from Jane there. No, one of the things I'm really quite mindful of as well is. Sorry, Jane, you go ahead first.
No, go. Go on, go. I was just going to wrap with the point. No, on you go.
No, honestly, one of the things that I'm just really conscious of is you mentioned there about kind of the industry working together and public-private partnerships, in information sharing as we move forward. And I hear it, we talk a lot about public-private partnerships, but we don't do a lot, and we need to start fostering much more positive and proactive environments. Compliance is a cost. Managing risk will always be a cost, but as you rightly said, if you could, we need to stop looking through the lens of the fact that, for example, when we're profiling customers for their behaviors and we're looking for, different types of transactions which could be risk indicators, what we also should be looking at is the behavior of the client changing because their life cycle is developing, and is there any other products that we could potentially be providing or servicing to our customers to help them during their development of their lifestyle. And so that is where profiling and bringing in AI functionalities into risk management is going to be a game changer for that value add, because whilst we're also looking for irregularities and changes in client patterns, what that also could be an indication of is that the client is changing, and that we then need to better service and basically front run the need of the client for new products and services based on what we understand about culture, geographics, use cases, etc. That's what excites me. Finally, bringing compliance as a business enabler and game changing that mindset. And one of the things that I love, and I heard this recently about all of the kind of social media sites, is that they don't have a function called compliance. They actually call it, what's it called? Business, it's a really, I can't remember the name, it's like a business support or social support. It's seen through a positive lens. And I think that by giving the name compliance to a function, we negatively impacted our ability to manage risk. Sorry.
Would you like to respond here?
Ethics and integrity.
Yes.
And that's how our Department of Justice, at least under the old regime, fashioned what would be expected of companies. So it's a compliance program that you're putting together. You and I would call it a compliance program, but it's a compliance ethics and integrity program.
I honestly, I love that change, because that simple, change in a name, in my opinion, will have a massive positive impact on ownership and accountability within the organisation, because there's no longer a compliance department, but each of us are individually responsible for ethical behaviour. So anyway,
Yeah,
or maybe I'm looking this through kind of rose-tinted glasses.
No, there's so much we could.
Yeah.
we could talk hours on this one.
Glass of wine later, probably. Yeah. But a final maybe question for us, looking at the future of crypto compliance, just looking ahead. So perhaps a bit of advice, I guess, that you could give people out there. So for AML and risk professionals looking to move into the digital asset space, what core skills or knowledge do they need to develop now to stay ahead of the next wave of crypto compliance challenges, perhaps?
Assuming they have a solid background in anti-money laundering or sanctions compliance, the starting point is they have to learn the product, the technology. And the problem is we've got multiple kinds of digital assets, so it's unpacking what it is you're going to be dealing with. And from a bank's perspective, the kind of customer that they're going to be banking, the type of activity they're going to take on. Selling crypto is different from being a custodian for crypto versus potentially being being an issuer or some way facilitating tokenized the flow of tokenized assets, whether it's securities or it's real world assets that we're dealing with. So I think that's the major thing. But the problem is that that's an incredible challenge. So for those of us who are just doing this on a day-to-day basis, Twitter or X is sort of our favorite friend, but there's so much there that how do you keep
top of it all?
So this is a major issue, is how to actually even know what you need to know.
And I think,
well put.
And without sounding cheesy, if I may say, a curious mindset. Constantly ask questions. And I remember when I started out my career and I finished my master's, went to the European Central Bank as a trainee lawyer, and suddenly realised that I thought I knew everything, and I realised in the space of a few days I knew nothing about the regulated financial system because I didn't know products. So I'm reading regulations, but I don't understand how I can apply them practically because I didn't understand the products. And I suddenly realised that I had to go back to basics and learn, and in those days we didn't have access to the same level of learning digitally or virtually that we have today. So people are in such better position, but yes, as you rightly said, there's so much out there. My attitude is start small, start where you're working in that environment, learn the products and services within that environment, and then as your career develops, move to different providers who potentially offer different types of services. If you look at TradeFi is a great example. I started in asset management, then moved into wholesale banking, then moved into investment banking, then moved into private banking, then touched on retail. I didn't need to learn all of it in one go, but slowly but surely I developed my knowledge based on the transition of my career across different front office advisory to market abuse to anti-money laundering to research, everything. So I would just say slow and steady wins the race. Be curious, ask questions, and if people aren't answering your questions, keep asking them.
Well, and you need to play with the product too.
Absolutely,
and
yes.
to have a fear and say, well, I'm not going to buy that because it's scary. You don't have to buy much or acquire much to start to play and learn. But even that's a complicated process, and there's so many different kinds of service providers, so many different kinds of assets you can get in, and so on. So it's a challenge, but I think curiosity and determination.
And if you sit in a second or third line, go and sit with the business. And most importantly, sit with the engineers. Get to understand their mindset, because that's what I did when I went into, I was working with that holding crypto firm. Changed my perspective on everything. Those guys, all they need to understand is your problem statement, and suddenly they will start firing off all of these tech solutions that you couldn't have even imagined. And it's the most exciting game changer of our time.
And often they'll just say, tell us what we need to do.
But they want to innovate. And the problem with engineers is if you just create a really static product roadmap for them, they're just like, this doesn't excite me. I want to innovate. I want to try something different. So that you need to balance that. You need to balance the shareholder kind of profit delivery, but also the innovation and kind of space the engineers need to be innovative.
Is there any final words, Carol, that you'd like to say, or even about the Luminous group as well, if there's anything?
Well, I think I'd like to go back to say what's going to be ahead in the coming year is that I think it's going to be a busy year. Obviously, there's some certain things that are very high level that are going to determine one, the fate of the market structure bill, which is going to be a major step forward in opening the door to this so-called area of real-world assets, where all of us really will have much more of our own self-sovereignty over our assets. So curiosity, determination, stick with it, learn as much as you can. I think those are all great takeaways, and I would say this is one of my more fascinating conversations.
Oh.
Thank you for
That's right. Oh, no, it's been an absolute
Jane
pleasure.
is the one that does all of the prep and the work. I just do some Manelli jazz hand into the situation, all that jazz.
No, it's all good. That was a brilliant conversation, and obviously we can carry this on afterwards as well. So thank you so much for being our guest today, Carol. It's been brilliant, and Una as well. And Carol is on later on the main stage this afternoon at 4:30. So for those of you who are not here, maybe get down here. She's going to be talking on the digital directions for crypto and compliance. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Carol. Thank you.
Yeah, she makes it easy.
Yeah.